My Outlook Days, Part 8, written by Vinod Mehta. In August 2001, a new American ambassador was posted to India. His name, Robert D. Blackwell. His qualification, access to the White House, besides being some sort of mentor to US National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. His ambition to transform Indo US relations not by deft diplomacy but by a round table strategically placed in his Roosevelt House abode. To this round table were invited some of the most influential Indian minds for an elaborate but not ostentatious meal with the ambassador, during which serious issues were to be discussed. At one point, Ambassador Blackwell boasted that the India Pakistan dispute would be resolved around his round table. It was an intriguing use of food, one which had never been formally attempted by a foreign envoy. Over 3 hours of a 6 course meal, Blackwell set the agenda and the pace of consumption. Occasionally, an American chief guest would be present who made a brief presentation and withdrew. On paper, the menu and agenda sounded enticing. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work that way in practice. Robert Blackwell was not an unpleasant man, neither was he an oaf. When he welcomed a guest to his Roosevelt house, there was discernible warmth in his greeting. However, when he moved to the famous round table and assumed the role of presiding officer, a different Blackwell emerged. It was not just the arrogance of power or the knowledge of who you are and who you represent, although both self assessments were visible. It was principally the post 9 by 11 conviction that the US must always set the rules. As long as you posed brief questions to the ambassador or simply nodded in agreement at every formulation he advanced, all was well. But God help if you differed with him or corrected him even on matters he was understandably ignorant of, like domestic politics. He not only defended his position fiercely, he would harangue, ridicule, dismiss, reprimand, scold the challenger, making him or her feel 3 feet tall. On the evening, I had the privilege of breaking bread with Blackwell, the ambassador, almost reduced to tears, a respected academic who had the temerity to state that 3 million American Muslims lived in US. Rubbish, rubbish, interjected the ambassador, accusing the lady of adding imaginary zeros to the real figure. The academic tried to explain that the figure had been obtained from the economist, but that did not impress Blackwell. He insisted she had cooked up the figures. She did not speak again. Blackwell, in full flow, forced a distinguished former ambassador to the US, Naresh Chandra, to put up his hand like a schoolboy pleading for an opportunity to speak. A veteran journalist editor, Inder Malhotra, sitting next to me, made some attempt to get a word in but gave up. A professor shook his head in disbelief and retreated. And then it dawned on me that the real purpose behind the round table was not dialogue but monologue. Under the pretext of two-way discussion, the Indian guests were lured into a lecture in which the Bush administration's position from Enron to the axis of evil were placed beyond the scope of argument. I tried to interrupt Blackwell once, but he shouted, I insist, in order to continue speaking. At times, the whole thing became fairly comical, leaving me with the conclusion that a superpower is not easily silenced. Blackwell, it became clear, would not just have the last word, he would also have the longest word. Half an hour or so before the dinner ended, a sort of hush fell over the round table as Blackwell's vilification of Iraq, Iran, and North Korea proceeded with ferocity. No one wanted to mess with him. I came back home fuming. I told my wife of the events at the round table. I felt humiliated and diminished at having to put up not only with appalling table manners but a fanatical imperiousness. In the following issue of Outlook, I wrote a piece, Blackwell's Round Table, scrupulously detailing his boorish behavior. I ended up my piece. Until Ambassador Blackwell becomes an equal opportunity host, I will skip any further summons to his round table. Around this time, I and the magazine got into an absorbing writer's quarrel. But before I tell the tale, let me declare an interest. All three players in the scrap are friends and distinguished contributors to Outlook. Their interventions have embellished and energized our pages. So, I tread carefully here since there is a tendency among the big boys and girls in the literary firmament to conclude that any criticism attached to their name in the media is the handiwork of the editor who is out to malign them. On our book review pages, our book's editor Sheila Reddy writes a mischievous but largely innocuous diary called Bibliophile. Although I seldom see it before it goes to print, it is the bane of my life. Frequently, it pokes fun at fragile egos. Those whose egos have been poked automatically assume I and Sheila sit in a smoke filled room armed only with malice as we proceed to destroy reputations. I tell you, going for Arun Jaitley is a piece of cake compared to going for Arvind Adiga. Pankaj Mishra, William Dalrymple, and Ramchandra Guha are the main characters in the story that unfolds. Pankaj, who can tentatively claim to have discovered when I was the editor of the Pioneer in the early 90s, published a book titled An End to Suffering, The Buddha in the World. We gave it to Dalrymple to review. He loved it. In the course of his review, he juxtaposed the son of the soil writer from, say, Allahabad with the son of the soil writer also from, say, Allahabad, but who had relocated to Connecticut via St. Stephen's College. Who was better qualified to diagnose and distill the real India? In a field dominated by the St. Stephen's Mafia and the Doon School diaspora, Willie theorized Pankaj Mishra is an outsider. He was born in Jhansi and grew up in the dusty railway colonies around Uttar Pradesh before taking a degree in the decaying anarchy of Allahabad University. In contrast, the optimistic platitudes of a diaspora writer like, say, Sunil Khilnani, educated abroad and knowing nothing of the grim reality of the boondocks of Bihar, Mishra does not lecture the world about South Asia from the sanitized safety of the East Coast campuses. Instead, he writes as a man who really knows from first hand experience the provincial India he writes about and in which he still lives most of the year. Ramchandra Guha rang and expressed a wish to contest Dalrymple's provocative contention. Ram, who had not yet published his magnum opus India after Gandhi, took up cudgels on behalf of the diaspora writer. His column, The Gins of Conceit, stated, Born to privilege, you cannot understand India. Reared in a humble home, you must. This is Dalrymple's thesis, to buttress which he offered two names, Sunil Khilnani and Pankaj Mishra. Ram then gets to the core of his argument. He is pretty vicious about Khilnani, possibly in retaliation to a piece where his nemesis wittily described Dalrymple as having invented a new genre, Bollywood history. But the fact is that whatever his class origins, Khilnani has given us the idea of India, which illuminates India's modern history more wonderfully than any other work of literature or scholarship. Ram concludes, it is a bit rich to be lectured on what constitutes good scholarship by one whose knowledge is so superficial. I might be allowed to add a personal anecdote. When I first met Dalrymple, it soon became clear that this India expert did not know who Dr. Ambedkar was. Dalrymple, possibly aware he had strayed into dangerous territory, checked the reaction to his piece. I told him Ram Guha was responding. He thought a brief letter might be in the offing. When he saw the 700-word column, he said, Oh God. Now, Dalrymple wanted his pound of flesh. Being an equal opportunity editor, I agreed. I usually rather enjoy Ramchandra Guha's slightly demented diatribes against his fellow writers, but since it is now my turn to be the target of his ire, I feel that I should at least point out that he mosquitoes me no less than 4 times in as many paragraphs. The big misrepresentation Willie clears first. I never argued, as he asserts in the piece, that Pankaj Mishra is a fine writer because he comes from a humble background. What I argued was that his background made him something of an outsider in the world of Indian writers in English, which is still dominated by authors from elite backgrounds, and that it gives him writing about Mofussil, India, a real authority derived from personal experience. Dalrymple also refuted the charge that he had never heard of Ambedkar. In fact, I have written about Ambedkar and his Dalit Buddhist intermittently since the late 1980s. Willie ends. I do not believe that someone's background should disqualify them from writing about a particular subject. How could I, as a Scottish writer obsessed by India and have always been enormously grateful for the tolerance, warmth, and generosity with which Indian readers and critics have responded to my successive books about their wonderful, complex, and endlessly fascinating country. Ram called to say he needed to respond to Dalrymple's response. I nodded. Having got his abuse out of the way, Ram notes, he concedes his elite Mufsil theory of literary merits lies in tatters, now writing that someone's background should not disqualify them writing about a particular subject, but he remains delightfully vague about his contributions to Ambedkar studies. As the non aligned referee in the contest, I called for timeout. Ram and Willie had each had two bites at the cherry. The correspondence was closed. Thank you for listening.